I'm Mackenzie Williams, 29 years old, and yesterday I returned home after 2 grueling years as a military nurse in Germany. All I wanted was to collapse into my own bed, in my own little house that I'd worked so hard to buy before deployment. Instead, I found my sister's kids had taken over every inch of my personal space. The house I'd lovingly saved for was now unrecognizable, transformed without my knowledge or permission. Before I dive into how my homecoming turned into an emotional battlefield I never trained for, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, hit that subscribe button, and stick around to see how I fought the hardest battle of my life, not overseas, but right here at home. The final weeks of my deployment in Landstuhl Regional Medical Center had been particularly brutal. As a trauma nurse, I'd seen things that would forever be etched in my memory: young soldiers with life-altering injuries, civilians caught in crossfire, and the constant, grinding pressure of knowing lives depended on our team's quick decisions. Those final months, I clung to thoughts of home like a lifeline. My little 3-bedroom house in Burlington with the blue shutters and the reading nook in the sunroom had been my first major adult purchase. I'd saved for years during my early military career, living in cramped base housing and picking up extra shifts whenever possible. I still remember the day I signed those mortgage papers, 3 years ago. The real estate agent had seemed surprised that a 26-year-old single woman was buying a house on her own, but that small brick home represented everything I'd worked for: stability, independence. A place that was wholly mine after years of temporary accommodations and shared spaces in military housing. "You sure you want a whole house to yourself?" my father had asked when I first shared my plans to buy. "Seems like a lot of responsibility for someone who might get deployed." My sister Allison had been even more direct. "Don't you want to wait until you're settled down with a husband and kids?" But I had been resolute. I wanted roots, even if I sometimes had to leave them. And I'd set everything up carefully before deployment, arranged for lawn care, programmed the thermostat, installed a security system I could monitor from overseas, and prepaid many of my bills. My parents had agreed to drive by occasionally to make sure everything was okay, collect any mail the post office didn't forward, and keep an eye out for any problems. During my deployment, I video called them weekly. In retrospect, the warning signs had been there. About 6 months ago, they began taking calls in their kitchen rather than visiting my house as they usually did when we spoke. When I asked direct questions about my place, they gave vague answers. "Everything's fine at your place," my mother would say. "We're helping Allison out a bit these days." I knew my sister was struggling, with 3 kids under 8 and her husband Matthew's job requiring frequent travel. Allison often relied on our parents for childcare and support, but nothing in these conversations prepared me for what awaited. The journey home had been exhausting: a 14-hour odyssey of military transport to commercial flights, layovers in unfamiliar airports, and finally touching down on American soil. I could have called my parents for a ride from the airport, but I wanted to surprise them. Besides, after so many months away, I craved those first few moments alone in my own space to decompress and reclimate to civilian life. The taxi pulled onto my street just as evening was falling. After paying the driver, I stood on the sidewalk with my military duffel bags, taking in the sight of my little blue-shuttered house. Something was different. The lawn, which I had arranged to be professionally maintained, was dotted with colorful plastic toys. The simple landscaping I had installed now featured whimsical garden ornaments, a family of ceramic gnomes, and a bright pinwheel spinning in the breeze. The curtains visible through the front windows were not the neutral tones I had left behind, but vibrant primary colors. A tricycle lay on its side near the driveway. Confusion washed over me as I walked up the path to my front door. Perhaps my parents had stored some of Allison's kids' toys while they were between houses. Allison and Matthew had been talking about moving to a bigger place last year. My key still worked in the lock, which provided a momentary relief, but when I pushed open the door, that relief evaporated instantly. My living room, once a calming space with a comfortable gray sofa, bookshelves, and minimalist decor was unrecognizable. The walls had been repainted a cheerful yellow. My sofa was pushed against one wall, covered with a bright slipcover and piled with stuffed animals. Where my coffee table had been, a child-sized craft table stood surrounded by tiny chairs. Plastic storage bins labeled Emma, No, Lily lined another wall, overflowing with toys. A large play kitchen occupied the corner where my reading chair had once been. I stood frozen in the doorway, duffel bag still in hand, unable to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be my house. And yet it was. The underlying architecture was unmistakable, even if everything else had changed. I moved further inside, shock giving way to a creeping sense of violation. My dining room had been converted to what looked like a homeschool classroom with a whiteboard, educational posters, and a child-sized desk. With mounting dread, I climbed the stairs to the second floor. My bedroom, my sanctuary, was now clearly occupied by a 7-year-old girl. Pink walls, princess bedding, and fairy lights greeted me instead of my soothing blue and gray color scheme, and the queen-sized bed I had splurged on as a gift to myself. My home office, where I had planned to study for my nurse practitioner certification during my return, was now a bedroom for my 5-year-old nephew, complete with dinosaur decals on the walls and toy bins everywhere. The guest room had been transformed into a nursery for my youngest niece. My sister's touch was evident in every corner. The same baby furniture she had proudly shown me via video call 3 years ago when she was pregnant with Lily. I sank down onto the hallway floor, my back against the wall, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. No one had told me. No one had asked. My entire home, the one thing I had worked for, had looked forward to returning to, had paid the mortgage on even while deployed, had been completely taken over. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway barely registered until I heard excited voices approaching the front door. "I can't wait to see Aunt Kenzie's face," a child's voice exclaimed. The door opened, and there they stood, my parents, my sister Allison with her husband Matthew, and their 3 children, Emma, No, and Lily. Their expressions of delight at seeing me quickly morphed into awkward surprise as they took in my stunned posture and the duffel bags I hadn't even unpacked. "Mackenzie," my mother exclaimed, rushing forward to embrace me. "We weren't expecting you until tomorrow." As she pulled me into a hug, I remained stiff, still trying to process what was happening. Over her shoulder, I locked eyes with my sister, who at least had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. "Surprise," I said flatly as my mother released me from her embrace. The word hung in the air, stripped of all enthusiasm. "Aunt Kenzie." Emma, my 7-year-old niece, bounded forward with no close behind. "Did you see my room? Mommy made it so pretty for me." "Your room?" I echoed, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. "Kids, why don't you go play in the backyard for a bit?" Matthew suggested, clearly sensing the tension. "Let Aunt Kenzie catch her breath, but I want to show her my dinosaurs." No protested. "Later, buddy," Matthew said firmly, ushering them toward the back door. He gave me an apologetic glance as he carried 3-year-old Lily out, following the older children. A heavy silence fell over the living room as I faced my parents and sister. The cheerfully decorated space felt surreal around us, like we were having a standoff in a kindergarten classroom. "When were you planning to tell me?" I finally asked, my voice low and controlled despite the storm brewing inside me. My father cleared his throat. "Kenzie, we were going to call you this week. We thought we had more time to prepare things." "Prepare things," I repeated. "Prepare what exactly?" "An explanation for why my entire house has been turned into a daycare center without my knowledge or consent." My mother stepped forward, hands fluttering nervously. "Honey, it was supposed to be temporary. Allison and Matthew had that terrible plumbing disaster 6 months ago, remember? Their house needed extensive repairs, and with 3 little ones, they couldn't stay in a hotel." I vaguely recalled a conversation about a leaking pipe in their master bathroom. What I didn't recall was any mention of them moving into my house. "6 months ago," I said slowly. "You've been living in my house for 6 months. I directed this question at Allison, who had yet to speak. She shrugged, attempting nonchalance though her eyes didn't quite meet mine. We figured you wouldn't mind since you weren't using it, and the kids needed stability. Wouldn't mind. I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. You completely redecorated my house, Allison. You painted the walls. You removed my furniture. Where is all my stuff? It's safe, my mother interjected quickly. Most of it is carefully stored in the garage. We kept everything important. Important according to whom? I asked. Did anyone think to ask me what I considered important? Did anyone think to ask me at all before making these decisions about my house? Mackenzie, my father's voice took on the tone he used when he thought I was being unreasonable. Your sister needed help. Family helps family. You were overseas, and the house was sitting empty. It wasn't sitting empty. It was waiting for me to come home, I said. I've been paying the mortgage. I've been paying the utilities. I've been paying the property taxes. And we're so grateful. Allison finally spoke up. You have no idea how much this has helped us save toward our new place. The casual way she said it, like my home had been nothing more than a convenient financial arrangement for her, made something snap inside me. When? I demanded. When exactly are you planning to move into this new place? Allison exchanged glances with my parents. Well, we've been looking. But with the market being what it is. So you have no actual plans to leave, I stated. It wasn't a question, Kenzie. My mother said soothingly. Why don't we all sit down and have dinner? I brought your favorite lasagna. You must be exhausted from your trip. We can discuss everything after you've had a chance to rest. The normality she was trying to force onto this utterly abnormal situation was the last straw. I'm not hungry, I said. What I'd like is to unpack in my bedroom, but apparently that's no longer an option. My mother looked pained. Emma was so excited to have a big girl room. We could set up the sofa bed in the sunroom for you for tonight. I stared at her in disbelief. You want me to sleep on a sofa bed? In my own house? Just until we figure things out, my father added. Figure what out? I asked. There's nothing to figure out. This is my house. A tense silence fell, broken only when the back door opened and the children tumbled back in, Matthew following with an expression that suggested he'd hoped our conversation would have reached a resolution by now. Aunt Kenzie, come see my room. No grabbed my hand, pulling me toward the stairs. Too numb to resist, I allowed myself to be led upstairs to what had once been my home office. No proudly showed me his dinosaur collection arranged on what had been my desk, now repurposed as a child's table. Emma joined us, eager to display her princess castle and collection of dolls in what had been my bedroom. The children's innocent excitement made it impossible to direct my anger at them. They had no idea they were showing me the dismantling of my personal space. To them, these rooms had simply become theirs, no different than if they'd moved to any new house. Dinner was a tense affair, with my parents making overly cheerful conversation while I pushed lasagna around my plate. They gushed about how well Emma was doing in school, how No had recently learned to ride a bike without training wheels, and how Lily had started forming complete sentences. We're just so blessed to have these little ones in our lives, my mother said, beaming at her grandchildren. Nothing compares to the joy of family, does it? Mackenzie has been doing important work too. Alina, my father said, in what I suppose he thought was a show of support. All those soldiers she's been helping. Oh, of course. My mother agreed quickly. But you know, Mackenzie, as meaningful as your career is, there's nothing like the sacrifice and reward of raising children. It's the most important job in the world. I set down my fork with a clink that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. I think I've seen enough, I said quietly. I'm going to get a hotel room tonight. Don't be ridiculous, my father said. This is your home, is it? I looked around at the transformed space that bore almost no resemblance to the home I'd left, because everything about this situation suggests otherwise. I stood up from the table. I'm going to get some essentials from the garage, assuming my belongings are still there. The garage, at least, had been spared a complete transformation, though it was now packed with boxes containing my displaced life. As I rummaged through them looking for clothes and toiletries, I came across a photo album I'd kept on my bedside table, pictures of friends from nursing school, my military graduation, the day I got the keys to this house. The album had been haphazardly stuffed into a box, its cover bent and several photos loose. I was still staring at it when Allison appeared in the doorway. "The kids were asking for you," she said. "They want to say goodnight." "How nice to be asked for something," I replied, not looking up from the damaged album. Allison sighed. "Look, I know you're upset, but honestly, Mackenzie, what did you expect? You've been gone for 2 years. Life goes on." I finally looked up at her. "Life going on doesn't mean you get to take what isn't yours. It's just a house," she said dismissively. "And we needed it more than you did. You weren't even here." "Because I was serving our country," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Because I was saving lives and watching people die. Because I was living in a barracks thousands of miles away, holding on to the thought of coming home to the one place in the world that was mine. Family helps family," she repeated our father's earlier words. "You would have done the same for me." "No," I said, suddenly certain. "I would have asked first. I would have respected your boundaries. I would have made sure you had a home to come back to." I zipped up my duffel bag with the few items I'd managed to find. "I'll be back tomorrow to figure this out. Tonight, I need space." As I walked back through what had once been my home, Emma and Noah ran up to hug me goodnight. Their innocent affection made this whole situation even more complicated. They weren't to blame for the adults' decisions. "Are you having a sleepover, Aunt Kenzie?" Emma asked innocently. "Something like that," I managed to reply. My mother tried once more to convince me to stay, but I remained firm. As I waited for the ride share that would take me to the nearest hotel, I looked back at the house I'd worked so hard for, now illuminated by unfamiliar children's nightlights glowing in the windows, and felt a pain deeper than any physical wound I'd treated during my deployment. Sleep eluded me in my hotel room that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my transformed house, my sister's dismissive expression, my parents' disappointment. Was I being unreasonable? Selfish? The accusations had found their mark, planting seeds of doubt that bloomed in the darkness. I'd always been the responsible one, the problem solver, the one who accommodated others. Even joining the military had been a practical decision, a way to serve while also funding my education and future. Was it really so awful to expect the same consideration in return? By morning, I was exhausted but determined to move forward. I'd already applied for several local nursing positions before my return, anticipating a transition to civilian life. Now, those applications took on new urgency. I needed income beyond my military benefits if I was going to be paying for temporary housing indefinitely. Providence Regional Hospital called for an interview that afternoon. As I prepared, I tried to focus on the professional opportunity rather than the personal chows, but memories of my deployment kept intruding, the camaraderie of my unit, the clear protocols even in crisis, the knowledge that everyone was working toward the same goal. How had coming home become more stressful than a war zone? The interview went well, with the trauma department director expressing particular interest in my military experience. As I left the hospital, I felt a small spark of hope. At least one aspect of my life was moving in the right direction. That spark dimmed considerably when I checked my phone to find 3 missed calls from my mother and a text message from Allison. "The kids are asking for you. When are you coming to see them?" The message carried an implicit guilt trip. I was disappointing innocent children by standing up for myself. With a sigh, I called the military counseling service I'd been referred to before discharge, scheduling an appointment for the following day. The counselor, a former Army psychologist named Dr. Winters, listened carefully as I explained the situation. "What you're describing is a significant boundary violation," she confirmed after I'd finished. Your feelings are entirely valid. Then why do I feel so guilty? I asked. Like I'm being selfish for wanting my own house back. Family dynamics are powerful, she explained. Patterns established in childhood can be extremely difficult to break, especially when they're reinforced by statements like family helps family, or implications that your needs matter less because you don't have children. She leaned forward slightly. But consider this. Would you tell a patient who had experienced what you have that they were being selfish? The question caught me off guard. Of course not. Then perhaps you deserve the same compassion you would show others, she suggested gently. As I left her office, I felt marginally steadier. The validation helped, but I still had no practical solution to my housing situation. The hotel was expensive, and while I could afford it short-term, it wasn't sustainable. Walking to my car, I was so preoccupied that I nearly collided with a man carrying a box of gardening supplies. "Wow, sorry about that," he said, steadying his box. Then recognition dawned on his face. Mackenzie. Mackenzie Williams. I peered at him, taking in the familiar features now matured. Jason Mitchell. He grinned. The one and only. "When did you get back? I thought you were overseas somewhere." "Germany," I confirmed. "I just got back a few days ago." "Welcome home," he said warmly. "You look tired, if you don't mind me saying so." Under normal circumstances, I might have been offended, but his genuine concern and our history. We'd been neighbors and friends before my deployment disarmed me. That obvious, huh? I attempted a smile. It's been a complicated homecoming. "Let me buy you coffee," he offered. "For old time's sake. There's a decent place just down the street." Too drained to refuse the kindness, I accepted. Over coffee, the story spilled out, my return, the shock of finding my house transformed, the ongoing conflict with my family. Jason listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly troubled. Wow, he said when I'd finished. "I had no idea. I've seen your sister and her kids around the neighborhood, but I assumed they were just visiting or house-sitting." I stared at him. "You've seen them, for how long?" He considered. "At least since last summer, I'd say. Definitely longer than 6 months." "Last summer," I repeated. "They told me they moved in 6 months ago, because of a plumbing disaster." Jason looked uncomfortable. "I don't want to get in the middle of family stuff, but I've definitely seen them coming and going regularly since July or August last year. Your sister was pregnant with another woman, organizing a yard sale in your driveway. I remember because they were selling some furniture I thought was yours, that blue armchair you loved." My stomach dropped. "My reading chair. They sold my furniture." "I could be mistaken," he backpedaled, seeing my distress. "It was just in passing." But the revelation settled heavily on me. Nearly a year, not 6 months, and they had been selling off my possessions. The deception ran deeper than I'd realized. "I'm sorry," Jason said. "I shouldn't have said anything." "No," I shook my head. "I needed to know. Thank you for being honest with me." He hesitated. "If you need a place to stay, I got a spare room. It's nothing fancy, but it's better than a hotel." The offer was tempting, but I wasn't ready to accept that level of help from someone I hadn't seen in years, however well-intentioned. "I appreciate that, but I'll be okay," I assured him. "I'm figuring things out." "At least take my number," he insisted. "If you need anything help moving stuff, a friendly face, whatever, I'm around." I accepted his contact information, feeling a small measure of relief at having an ally in the neighborhood. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Allison. It contained photos of No's dinosaur collection arranged on what had been my desk, and Lily playing with finger paints on what appeared to be a new easel set up in my sunroom. The message read, "Making memories in our happy home. When are you coming to visit Aunt Kenzie?" The casual possessiveness of, our happy home, sent a wave of anger through me. This wasn't miscommunication or a well-intentioned mistake. This was deliberate appropriation, with the children being used as emotional leverage. I didn't respond to the text. Instead, I called a lawyer. The consultation was brief but informative. As the sole owner of the house, with a mortgage in only my name, I had every legal right to reclaim my property. The fact that I had never given explicit permission for my family to live there, let alone renovate, strengthened my position. In a normal tenant situation, you'd need to follow formal eviction procedures, the lawyer explained. But given that there's no lease or rental agreement, and they entered the property without permission during your absence, you have more immediate options. She outlined my choices, from changing the locks immediately, legally permissible but potentially explosive, to setting a firm move-out deadline backed by legal notice. Whatever you decide, she advised, document everything. Take photos of the current state of the house. Save all text messages and emails. Note dates of conversations. If this escalates, you'll want a clear record. The conversation left me feeling simultaneously empowered and exhausted. I had the law on my side, but exercising those rights would likely destroy my relationship with my family. Was I prepared for that consequence? The answer came when I checked my email late that night and found a message from my homeowner's insurance company. They were following up on a claim filed 9 months ago for extensive water damage requiring significant renovation. The claim had been submitted by Allison, who had somehow convinced them she had authority to act on my behalf. The pieces clicked into place. There had been no emergency plumbing disaster forcing them to seek shelter in my home. They had deliberately moved in while I was deployed, filed a fraudulent insurance claim, used the money to renovate my house to their preferences, and sold my furniture. All while letting me continue to pay the mortgage and utilities. The betrayal was breathtaking in its completeness. Any remaining doubt or guilt evaporated. I forwarded the email to my lawyer with a simple message. I've made my decision. How quickly can we proceed? 3 days later, my family received a formal letter from my lawyer. It stated in clear terms that they had 30 days to vacate my property, return any sold or disposed items, and restore the house to its previous condition. The letter also noted that I was aware of the fraudulent insurance claim and reserved the right to pursue further legal action regarding that matter. I wasn't present when they received the letter, but the explosion of texts and calls that followed told me everything about their reaction. My father's voicemail was particularly scathing. Lawyers, is this really how you want to handle a family matter? I never thought you'd sink this low, Mackenzie. My mother's approach was pure emotional manipulation. I can't stop crying. The children don't understand why their aunt hates them so much. How could you do this to your own family? Allison didn't bother with calls or texts. She simply posted a vague but pointed message on social media about toxic family members who prioritize property over people. That garnered dozens of sympathetic comments from friends who knew nothing of the actual situation. Rachel urged me to ignore the barrage. They're trying to make you feel guilty enough to back down. Stay strong. I did, though each message and call chipped away at my resolve. The silent treatment might have been easier to bear than this constant reminder of my family's disappointment and anger. After a week of this, my father called with a different approach. Your mother and I think we should all sit down and talk this through. No lawyers, just family. We can meet at our house tomorrow evening. Despite my misgivings, I agreed. Perhaps face-to-face communication would be more productive than this painful long-distance conflict. I arrived at my parents' house the following evening to find not just my immediate family, but several extended relatives as well, my father's sister and her husband, my mother's brother, even my elderly grandmother, who rarely left her assisted living facility these days. It was clearly a calculated move to maximize the pressure on me. I thought this was going to be just us, I said quietly to my father as he took my coat. Family matters affect the whole family, he replied, his tone making it clear this ambush had been the plan all along. The living room was arranged like a tribunal, with chairs positioned so that I would be facing everyone else. I chose to remain standing instead, unwilling to physically place myself in the position of defendant. My father cleared his throat and began what sounded like a prepared speech. We've called this meeting because we're concerned about the path Mackenzie is taking. Using lawyers against your own family is not how we raised you to behave. I only involved a lawyer after discovering the extent of the deception, I replied evenly, including the fraudulent insurance claim filed in my name. A flicker of discomfort crossed my father's face, but he pressed on. There were extenuating circumstances that you don't fully understand. Then explain them to me, I challenged. Explain why you told me it was a recent emergency when they've been living in my house for nearly a year. Explain why my furniture was sold without my knowledge. Explain why no one thought to ask my permission or even inform me about any of this. My uncle interjected. Mackenzie, you need to understand that Allison has 3 young children. Their needs have to come first. Why, I asked simply. Why do their needs automatically supersede mine? I worked for that house. I pay for that house. I needed that home to come back to after serving our country for 2 years. It's just a house, my aunt said dismissively. Family is what matters. If family matters so much, I countered, then why didn't anyone respect me enough to be honest? Why didn't anyone consider what I might need? My mother, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. We know you're upset, Mackenzie. And perhaps we should have handled things differently, but what's done is done. The children are settled now. Emma is doing so well in school, and No has friends on the street. You wouldn't want to disrupt their lives, would you? The implication was clear. I was supposed to sacrifice my needs for the children's stability, a stability created through deception and theft. Where was this concern for disruption when you moved them into my house without permission? I asked. When you redecorated and sold my things. When you filed a fraudulent insurance claim that could have legal consequences. Allison, who had been uncharacteristically subdued until now, finally spoke. We needed a place to live, Mackenzie. Matthew's business was struggling, we couldn't afford our rent anymore, and the kids needed stability. What were we supposed to do? You could have asked me, I said. You could have been honest. We might have worked something out together. Would you have said yes? She challenged. I don't know, I admitted. But I deserved the chance to make that decision myself. My father stepped back into the conversation with what he clearly thought was a peace offering. We've discussed this as a family, and we think we found a solution. Your mother and I are prepared to compensate you for the use of your house, say, $500 a month while Allison and her family continue living there. I stared at him in disbelief. That's less than half my mortgage payment. It's what we can afford, he replied. And you could easily get an apartment. You're just one person after all. You don't need all that space. That phrase, he's just one person, cut deeper than perhaps anything else that had been said. The implication that my needs were inherently less valid because I didn't have children was a sentiment I'd encountered throughout my life, but never so blatantly from my own family. This isn't about what I need, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion building inside me. It's about what's mine. What I worked for, what I earned, what you took without asking. Nobody took anything, Allison protested. We're family. Family doesn't exploit each other, I replied. Family doesn't lie and manipulate and steal. Steal, my father repeated incredulously. That's a serious accusation, Mackenzie. Is it inaccurate? I challenged. You moved into my house without permission. You sold my furniture. You filed a fraudulent insurance claim in my name. You renovated my property without consent. In what world is that not theft? My grandmother, who had been silent until now, spoke up. In my day, families stuck together through thick and thin. This generation is too concerned with mine and yours. When your grandfather was deployed in Korea, his brother moved in with me to help with repairs and protection. We didn't quibble over ownership. With all due respect, Grandma, I replied, did you invite his brother to move in? Did he sell your furniture and redecorate your house without telling you? She had no response to that. I've listened to everyone here tell me why I should sacrifice my home, my financial security, and my boundaries for Allison's family, I said, looking around the room. But I haven't heard a single person acknowledge that what was done to me was wrong. Not one apology, not one admission of fault. Just more demands and guilt trips. The silence that followed was telling. The lawyer's letter stands, I said finally. 30 days, and if anything else of mine has been sold or damaged, I expect to be compensated for its full value. If you do this, my father said, his voice low and warning, there will be consequences for this family. There already have been consequences, I replied. I'm just not the one who should be bearing them. I left then, ignoring the calls of my name, the pleas to reconsider, the thinly veiled threats of family estrangement. In my car, I finally let out the breath I'd been holding, feeling both drained and somehow lighter. The path ahead would be difficult, but for the first time since my return, I felt certain it was the right one. 3 days later, I received a group text from Allison. Since you're forcing us out of our home, the least you could do is help us find a new place. We need 40 bedrooms, a yard, and good schools. Budget is tight since Saman is making us move unexpectedly. I didn't dignify it with a response. Instead, I focused on moving forward. The job at Providence Regional came through, and I was scheduled to start in 2 weeks. Jason helped me document the current state of my house, taking photos and noting damages when my family wasn't home. We discovered more evidence of the insurance fraud, receipts for renovations, correspondence with contractors, all using my name without authorization. This is serious stuff, Jason commented as we reviewed the documentation. They could face legal consequences beyond just eviction. I know, I said, conflicted. I don't want to send my sister to jail, but I can't just let this go either. One step at a time, he advised. Get your house back first. Then decide how to handle the fraud. As the 30-day deadline approached, there was no sign of my family preparing to move. No packing boxes, no rental trucks, no house hunting appointments that I was aware of. They seemed to be calling my bluff, confident that family ties would ultimately prevent me from following through. They were wrong. On day 29, I called the lawyer. On day 30, a sheriff's deputy accompanied me to the house to serve the formal eviction notice. My parents had arrived to support Allison, and the scene that unfolded on my front lawn was exactly the public spectacle I had hoped to avoid. How could you? My mother sobbed as neighbors peeked through curtains at the commotion. Your own flesh and blood. Where are we supposed to go? Allison demanded, using her body to block the doorway even as the deputy explained that legally she had to vacate. You've had 30 days to figure that out, I replied, keeping my voice level despite the churning in my stomach. The same 30 days you ignored, betting I wouldn't follow through. In the end, they had no choice. The law was unambiguous. As my family hurriedly packed essentials under the watchful eye of the deputy, I stood apart, both present and removed from the emotional chows swirling around me. The children were confused and upset, having been told only that Aunt Kenzie is making us leave our home. Emma glared at me with a hurt and anger no 7-year-old should have to feel, while No asked repeatedly why I was being so mean. Only Lily, too young to fully grasp what was happening, offered me a hug before being quickly pulled away by my sister. You've made your choice, my father said as they loaded the last of their immediate necessities into their vehicles. I hope it was worth destroying your family for. They drove away, the children's faces pressed against windows, my mother in tears, my sister refusing to look back. The deputy gave me a sympathetic nod before leaving as well, leaving me alone in front of my reclaimed but somehow hollow-feeling house. I had won, technically, but standing there on my front lawn, watching my family drive away believing me to be the villain of the story, victory felt remarkably like loss. The silence in the house was deafening after they left. I wandered from room to room, surveying the aftermath of their hasty departure. Toys forgotten in corners, children's artwork still taped to walls, a refrigerator covered in finger paintings and school schedules. It felt like walking through the site of a natural disaster, trying to assess what could be salvaged from the wreckage. The physical transformation was jarring enough, but even more disorienting was the knowledge that this place that had once been my sanctuary now felt alien and contaminated by conflict. I couldn't even bring myself to sleep in what had been my bedroom, now painted pink with princess decals still adorning the walls. Instead, I made up the couch in the living room, surrounded by the remnants of my family's occupation. Rachel arrived the next morning with coffee, donuts, and a fierce determination to help me reclaim my space. "This is fixable," she insisted as we stood surveying the damage, one room at a time. "We'll make it yours again." I wasn't so sure. The structural changes were significant. Walls had been painted, built-in shelves had been installed in what had been my office, and the hardwood floors I'd lovingly maintained showed the scars of children's toys and furniture dragged across the surface. "Maybe I should just sell it," I said, overwhelmed by the scope of the restoration needed. "Start fresh somewhere else." "Is that what you want?" Rachel asked. "Or is that what's easiest?" I didn't have an answer. Finding a temporary apartment became a priority. I couldn't keep staying in hotels, and the house as it stood wasn't emotionally habitable for me. Rachel helped me search, and within a week, I had secured a month-to-month lease on a small one-bedroom not far from the hospital where I would soon start work. "It's just temporary," I reminded myself as I unpacked the few possessions I had managed to salvage from the garage, "just until I figure out what to do with the house." My first day at Providence Regional was a welcome distraction from the personal chows. The familiar routines of a medical environment, the clear protocols and expectations, provided a structure I desperately needed. In the trauma department, split-second decisions could mean life or death, a pressure I was well trained to handle, and which paradoxically felt easier than navigating the tangled web of family betrayal. "You're a natural," my supervisor commented after observing me handle a particularly challenging case involving a multi-car accident victim. "The military training really shows." I thanked her, not mentioning that work was currently the only place where I felt competent and in control. Outside of work, the fallout from the eviction continued to spread. My parents had apparently shared their version of events with extended family and friends, casting me as the heartless villain who had thrown her sister and innocent children out onto the street without provocation. Distant relatives I hardly spoke to sent messages expressing their disappointment in me. Family friends I had known since childhood crossed to the other side of the street when they saw me coming. The isolation might have been unbearable if not for the unexpected support system that emerged. Jason continued to check on my house during the weeks I stayed in the apartment, documenting the restoration needed and even beginning some of the simpler repairs himself. Rachel introduced me to her friend group, people who knew nothing of my family drama and accepted me without preconceptions, and my colleagues at the hospital, many of them veterans themselves, provided a professional community that understood the challenges of reintegration after deployment. 3 weeks after the eviction, I finally felt ready to return to the house and begin the serious work of reclamation. Jason had already helped me document everything for insurance purposes, a legitimate claim this time, and had repainted the living room back to its original calm blue. "I hope it's okay that I started," he said somewhat nervously when I arrived with my toolkit and determination. I remembered how much you loved this color. The gesture touched me deeply. It's perfect. Thank you. Together, we tackled the house room by room. The master bedroom returned to its serene sanctuary status. The princess decals carefully removed. The walls repainted in the soft gray I had originally chosen. The office required more extensive work, removing the built-in shelves that had been installed for nose toys, refinishing the desk that had been covered in dinosaur stickers, replacing the professional reference books that had mysteriously disappeared during my family's occupation. Word of our renovation project somehow reached my hospital colleagues, and to my surprise, several of them volunteered their assistance. A Saturday in early June found my house filled with people I had known for less than 2 months, all willingly giving up their free time to help me rebuild. My brother was in the Marines, explained one nurse as she helped me sand down damaged areas of the hardwood floor. When he came back from his second tour, his girlfriend had moved another man into their apartment. I know it's not the same, but I get it, you know. Coming home should mean coming home to something solid. I did know. And her understanding, along with the physical presence of these new allies, began to heal something that had been broken inside me. As the house slowly transformed back into a space that reflected me rather than my sister's family, I found myself thinking more clearly about the larger issues at play. The fraudulent insurance claim still loomed as a potential legal problem, one I hadn't yet decided how to handle. On one hand, it was a serious crime that had caused significant damage to my property and financial standing. On the other hand, pursuing it would mean potential criminal charges against my sister, further fracturing an already shattered family. I consulted with my lawyer, who laid out the options without judgment. You could report the fraud and let the insurance company and potentially prosecutors handle it, or you could use it as leverage to negotiate compensation for the damages without involving authorities, or you could simply let it go and absorb the losses yourself. None of the choices felt entirely right. The decision was complicated by the persistent attempts at contact from my family. My mother called daily, leaving voicemails that ranged from tearful pleas for reconciliation to passive-aggressive guilt trips about the children missing their home. My father's approaches were less frequent but more direct, demands that I fix this mess by allowing Allison and her family to return. Allison herself remained largely silent, though I learned through the neighborhood grapevine that she and the children had moved in with my parents temporarily while Matthew stayed with his brother. The arrangement was clearly causing strain. My mother's voicemails increasingly referenced the challenges of having 3 young children in their retirement-sized home. It was Jason who ultimately helped me gain perspective one evening as we finished painting the sunroom. You know, he said, carefully applying the final stroke to the trim. I've been thinking about this whole situation from a different angle. What if this isn't about a house at all? I looked at him questioningly. What if it's about respect? He continued. About acknowledging that your needs and boundaries matter just as much as anyone else's. Your family took that away from you, the right to decide what happens with your own property, your own life. Getting the house back is just the physical manifestation of reclaiming that respect. His words resonated deeply. This wasn't about square footage or mortgage payments or even furniture. It was about my family's fundamental belief that my needs were secondary, negotiable, disposable. So what does that mean for where we go from here? I asked. It means, he said thoughtfully, that real reconciliation can't happen until they acknowledge that basic truth, until they really see you, as a person with equal standing and legitimate needs of your own. A week later, Allison reached out directly for the first time since the eviction. Her text was simple, "Can we talk? Just you and me." I agreed to meet her at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown, far from both my house and our parents' home. She arrived looking tired but composed, the entitled indignation of our previous encounters notably absent. "Thank you for coming," she began, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug. I've been doing a lot of thinking. I waited, not wanting to make this easier for her. What I did was wrong, she continued after a moment. I should have asked you. I should have been honest with you from the beginning. It was the first acknowledgement of wrongdoing I'd heard from any family member, and it caught me off guard. Why weren't you? I asked. She sighed. Because I knew what the answer would be. And because it was easier to ask forgiveness than permission. And because, she hesitated, because part of me felt entitled to it. Like you owed me because you're single with no kids, and I'm struggling with 3. The honesty was refreshing, even if the underlying attitude still stung. I don't owe you my house, I said quietly, or anything else, just because I made different life choices. I know that now, she admitted. Or I'm learning to know it. Therapy is helping. We talked for nearly 2 hours, covering ground that should have been addressed years ago, her resentment of my independence, my frustration with her constant expectation of accommodation, the patterns established in childhood that had calcified into adult conflict. I'm not asking to come back to the house, she clarified toward the end of our conversation. But I am asking if there's a way forward for us, as sisters. The kids miss you, despite everything. I miss them too, though I had tried not to examine that pain too closely. I think there could be, I said cautiously, but it would have to be different, equal. With boundaries that are respected on both sides. She nodded slowly. I'd like to try that. It was a small beginning, fragile and uncertain, but it was something. As I drove home afterward, I felt a tentative hope that perhaps not everything had been irreparably broken after all. My parents proved more resistant to this new paradigm. When Allison told them about our conversation, my mother immediately called with renewed demands disguised as reconciliation. I'm so glad you two are talking again, she gushed. Now we can put this unfortunate business behind us and figure out a better arrangement for everyone. What did you have in mind? I asked, already sensing where this was headed. Well, since you're not using the whole house anyway, perhaps Allison could use just part of it. The children have been asking about their rooms, and it would make things so much easier for everyone. The old pattern reasserting itself, as predictable as the changing seasons. Mom, I said firmly, that's not going to happen. My house is my house. I'm not sharing it, subdividing it, or giving it away. But family helps family, she insisted, falling back on the familiar refrain. Yes, I agreed. And that help needs to be freely given, not taken by force or manipulation. It needs to respect boundaries and needs on all sides. I don't understand why you're being so rigid about this, she complained. It's just a house. If it's just a house, I countered, then why is it so important for Allison to have mine specifically? There are plenty of other houses. She had no answer for that. My father was even less receptive when he called the next day. Your sister says you're still being stubborn about the house, he began without preamble. I thought you two were working things out. We are, I replied. But working things out doesn't mean giving her my house. It means establishing a healthier relationship based on mutual respect. Respect, he scoffed, is that what you call throwing your family out on the street? Your mother and I are too old to have 3 young children running around our house. You need to be the bigger person here and help your sister. I am being the bigger person, I said. I'm offering reconciliation without restitution. I'm not pursuing the insurance fraud. I'm willing to rebuild a relationship despite the theft and betrayal. That's me being generous. The conversation ended poorly, with my father once again warning me that my choices were destroying the family. But as the weeks passed and my house continued to transform back into my sanctuary, I found myself less devastated by these confrontations. The opinions and approval of my family still mattered to me, but they no longer defined me. I was building something new, not just a restored home, but a life anchored in self-respect and surrounded by people who saw and valued me as I was. Allison and I continued to meet occasionally, our conversations gradually becoming less fraught and more authentic. She found a townhouse within their budget, not as large as my house but comfortable and in a good school district. The children were adjusting, though Emma still occasionally asked when they were going home to my house. I told her that was just a temporary place. Allison explained during one of our coffee meetings that it was always your house, and we were just visiting for a while. It wasn't entirely accurate, but it was a step toward honesty that I appreciated. My parents remained more distant, unable or unwilling to acknowledge their role in the conflict. I maintained contact but with clearer boundaries than I'd ever enforced before. When my mother tried to guilt me about not visiting often enough, I calmly explained that I was welcome to visit them, but I would leave if the conversation turned to criticism or manipulation. When my father made dismissive comments about my fancy hospital job being less important than family obligations, I ended the call and waited for him to call back with an apology before resuming contact. It wasn't perfect, and there were days when the estrangement felt like a physical ache, but there were also moments of genuine connection breaking through the old patterns. My mother calling just to ask how my day was without any agenda. My father grudgingly complimenting the landscaping work Jason and I had done on my front yard. Allison and I remembering how to laugh together over shared childhood memories. 6 months after my return from deployment, my house was finally fully restored. Not to an exact replica of what it had been before, but to a space that reflected who I had become through this journey. Some changes remained. I had kept the built-in window seat in what had been Emma's room, now converted to a more comfortable guest room. The backyard playground equipment had been donated to a local park rather than dismantled. Small reminders that even painful chapters leave their mark. As I stood in my living room on the anniversary of my homecoming, surrounded by the space I had fought for and reclaimed, I felt a sense of peace that had been elusive for so long. My home was truly mine again, not just legally or physically, but emotionally as well. The battle I had never expected to fight on home soil had left its scars, but it had also forged something stronger in me. The knowledge that setting boundaries wasn't selfish but necessary, that standing up for myself wasn't cruel but courageous, and that sometimes the family we choose can heal the wounds inflicted by the family we're born into. The first time I invited my sister and her children to visit my reclaimed house was exactly 7 months after the eviction. It was a deliberate choice. I wanted to be completely settled, completely confident in my space before opening that door again. I also wanted to be sure that Allison truly understood and respected that this was my home, not a shared family resource she could reclaim at any point. "Are you sure about this?" Rachel asked when I told her of my plans. Her protectiveness had been a constant throughout this journey. "It's a big step." "I'm sure," I said, though the butterflies in my stomach suggested at least a little uncertainty. The kids shouldn't lose their aunt because of adult mistakes. "And Allison and I are in a better place now." It was true. Our coffee shop conversations had gradually evolved into something resembling the sisterhood we'd never quite managed in childhood. Without our parents' dynamic of favoritism and comparison, without the pressure of shared space and violated boundaries, we were slowly learning to see each other clearly for perhaps the first time. The visit itself was both easier and harder than I had anticipated. Emma was initially standoffish, clearly still processing her feelings about the house that had briefly been hers. Noah was more adaptable, immediately gravitating to the dinosaur model kits I'd purchased as a peace offering, and Lily at 3 showed no signs of remembering the conflict at all, happily exploring the new space with delight. Allison maintained careful respect for my boundaries throughout the afternoon, asking before entering any room beyond the main living areas, gently correcting Emma when she referred to my old room, bringing her own snacks for the children rather than assuming access to my kitchen. Small gestures that acknowledge the painful history between us and her commitment to doing better. "The house looks great," she said as we sat on the back patio while the children played in the yard. "Different, but great." "Thanks," I replied. "It was a lot of work." "I'm sorry about that," she said, the apology simple but sincere. "About all of it, really." I nodded, accepting the words without needing to revisit the hurt. "How are things at the townhouse?" "Good, actually. The kids have friends in the complex, and the school is walking distance. And it's ours, well, the bank's and ours, but you know what I mean. No more renting." "I'm glad," I said, and meant it. "You deserve your own space, too." She looked at me thoughtfully. "That's something I don't think I really understood before. How important having your own space is, not just physically, but emotionally too. Having something that's just yours." It was perhaps the most profound acknowledgement she had offered yet. Not just of the specific wrong she had committed against me, but of the underlying value she had failed to recognize. My parents remained more complicated. After months of strained interactions, my mother had begun making tentative efforts toward genuine connection, occasionally calling just to chat without agenda or asking about my work with authentic interest. My father was more resistant, still prone to passive-aggressive comments about family loyalty and my overaction to the house situation, but even he had begun to show glimmers of change, helping me replace the water heater when it failed unexpectedly, offering gardening advice without the usual side of criticism. Neither had yet offered a full apology or acknowledgement of how profoundly they had violated my trust. I had accepted that such recognition might never come, that our relationship might always carry this unhealed wound, but I had also learned that I could love them without subjecting myself to their definitions of my worth and obligations. The physical restoration of the house had been completed months ago, but the emotional reclamation was an ongoing process. Each night I spent peacefully in my own bed, each morning I woke to the quiet sanctuary I had created. Each decision I made about my space without consideration of anyone else's preferences, all were acts of quiet revolution against a lifetime of being told my needs came last. Jason had become more than a helpful neighbor during this process. Our friendship had deepened into something neither of us had anticipated but both welcomed. He understood my need for independence in a way few others did, never pushing for more involvement in my decisions than I freely offered, respecting the boundaries I was still learning to articulate. "You're different now," he observed one evening as we sat on my front porch swing, watching the sunset. "Not in a bad way, just different from before your deployment." "Trauma changes people," I said, thinking of my military service. "So does betrayal. So does standing up for yourself," he countered gently. "I think that's the biggest change I see. You always knew your own mind, but now you trust it too." It was an astute observation. Before this ordeal, I had often second-guessed my right to prioritize my own needs, to claim my own space in the world. That uncertainty had been eroded, partially by the trauma of having everything taken from me, but equally by the triumph of reclaiming it. My professional life had flourished alongside this personal growth. 6 months into my position at Providence Regional, I had been promoted to trauma team leader, a role that leveraged both my military experience and my newly strengthened assertiveness. My colleagues respected me not despite my boundaries, but because of them. My clarity about what I could and couldn't take on made me a more effective leader and team member. Looking back on the years since my return from deployment, the journey seemed almost impossible. From the devastation of that first homecoming to the hard-won peace of my current life, it was a transformation I could never have anticipated or planned for. The most profound lesson wasn't about property rights or family dynamics, though those had certainly been part of it. The deeper truth I had discovered was about the courage to stand firmly in my own worth, to defend my right to exist on my own terms, and to recognize that loving others didn't require erasing myself. One crisp autumn evening, almost exactly 1 year after my return, I hosted a small gathering in my fully reclaimed home. Rachel was there with her new boyfriend. Several of my hospital colleagues had come. Jason was manning the grill on the back patio, and in a development that still felt tentative, but hopeful, Allison had brought the children for a brief appearance. As I looked around at this unlikely assembly, the family I was born into cautiously reintegrating with, the family I had chosen, I felt a sense of completeness that transcended the physical space we occupied. My mother approached me as I stood observing the gathering, a glass of wine in hand. "I wish your father could have come," she said, her voice carrying just a hint of the old guilt technique. "He's welcome whenever he's ready to respect my boundaries," I replied calmly, no longer defensive about this position. She nodded, surprising me. "He'll get there. He's stubborn, like someone else I know." The gentle teasing in her tone was new, an acknowledgement of my strength rather than a criticism of it. After a moment, she added, "You've created something beautiful here, Mackenzie. Not just the house, but all of this." She gestured to the gathering. "I'm proud of you." The words I had waited a lifetime to hear, offered without qualification or comparison to my sister. I let them sink in, savoring their simple truth. "Thank you," I said simply. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, I found myself alone in my living room for a moment, surrounded by the evidence of my reclaimed life. Photos of my military service displayed prominently on walls that had once been covered with children's artwork, books arranged on shelves that had once held toys, spaces defined by my needs and preferences rather than someone else's vision of what my life should be. The house itself was both unchanged and utterly transformed, the same structure, the same bones, but now embodying a different truth, that sometimes the hardest battle isn't fought overseas, but in your own backyard. And sometimes victory isn't about defeating others, but standing firmly for yourself. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? How did you balance your own needs with family expectations? Drop a comment below, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear more stories about navigating life's toughest challenges. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. And remember, standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary for creating a life where everyone's needs are honored, including your own.